Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Indie Pop Girl, the podcast for music chat, new releases, hidden gems, and nostalgic deep dives. I am back from covering Mitski over the last 2 weeks. It's been so enjoyable, but for now, the Indie Classic series is continuing, and for this week, I'll be talking about one of my favourite records from the Manic Street Preachers, Futurology from 2014. And before we get into the episode, if you enjoy music deep dives like this, please consider following the podcast or leaving a like depending on where you're listening. It really helps the show reach more people, and it means a lot for a small independent podcast like this one. Futurology is the 12th studio album by the Manic Street Preachers, released on the 7th of July 2014 by Columbia Records. The record was produced by the band and assisted by Los Williams and Alex Silver, who engineered the Holy Bible. The band recorded the album at Faster Studios in Wales and Hansa Studios in Berlin, Germany. That was an inspired choice, as Berlin is drenched in so much musical history, and Futurology's main inspiration was the band travelling through Europe during their National Treasures tour in 2011. The record is a complete sonic departure for the band. Futurology was released just 10 months after their more acoustic and gentler release, Rewind the Film, in September 2013. The band worked on both projects simultaneously, and I love how the band had a clear artistic vision for each project. Futurology is classed as an alternative record, with krautrock being the main inspiration. But the band go even further. They experiment with hints of new wave, indie pop, indie rock, disco rock, and even hints of prog, all backed with synths and electronica. What is clever is that the band didn't fully alienate their trademark sound, and that is still present throughout the record. Futurology is immediate, fresh, daring and experimental, and following up Rewind the Film with an artistic statement like this must be applauded. I don't think anyone predicted the Manic Street Preachers to release such a synth-driven record like this, and, well, I certainly didn't. Lifeblood from 2004 was their misunderstood masterpiece, also driven by synths, and had a lukewarm reaction upon release. I also have an episode dedicated to Lifeblood where I discuss this in more detail and how I became a fan, so please check out that episode once this one has finished. Lifeblood took a long time to be fully appreciated, despite it being way ahead of its time. Futurology was met with widespread critical acclaim and was commercially successful. It debuted at number 2 on the UK album chart and ended up featuring on so many publication end-of-year lists. The band were energised, refreshed, and this record contains some of their strongest work and production. The album also contains features from Nina Hoss, Georgia Ruth Williams and Green Gartside, all contribute in their own unique way and add so much texture and variety, singing alongside James Dean Bradfield. It's probably no surprise why I have included this record as part of the Indie Classic series. As you know by now, I love anything with synths and electronica, and I just adore what the Manics achieved with this project. It's like Lifeblood's big grown-up sister, and I do hope in the future that they explore the synth sounds again, because I feel it's something that the later records are lacking. Futurology takes on the idea of an indie record and pushes what an alternative and indie record could sound like in the 2010s. That it's okay to use Berlin era Bowie as an inspiration, to be experimental and use synths and electronica during a time when a lot of indie bands were opting with a more lo-fi sound instead. No one else was sounding like this in 2014, and I have to credit James, who has stated on more than one occasion that one of his favourite records is Empires and Dance by Simple Minds. If you are listening and are aware of Empires and Dance, then you will know exactly what I mean. Both records share the same typography and style, driven by travel, art, music, and culture. The Holy Bible also shares the same typography, and the Manics celebrated the 20th anniversary of the Holy Bible during the Futurology era in their live shows. It was truly mind-blowing seeing the Holy Bible played live in its entirety during the first half, and then experiencing their hits and Futurology tracks in the second half. I don't know if it's all coincidence, but the Holy Bible was released in 1994, Lifeblood in 2004, and Futurology in 2014. They are all different from each other, but they all have that fearless thread of experimentation running through them. It might not be the obvious Manics pick to include in this series, but I feel it's an important one. It's a record that doesn't sound dated all these years later and still has the same impact and freshness, all wrapped up with some killer songwriting, arrangements, and production. As I have mentioned in previous episodes, I will not be playing clips of the songs, so if you are curious, then please support the artists I cover by streaming, downloading, or buying physical copies. Thank you. Track 1, Futurology. So the record kicks off in a slightly familiar fashion. I'd say the title track is quite reminiscent of the band's earlier work, and it introduces the record really nicely. The track relies less on the synths, but it's not a bad thing at all. There are keys present, and to me, it sounds like a Rhodes sitting underneath the slightly stripped down verses before the song explodes into the chorus. Nicky Wire joins James on the vocals during the chorus, and it's so catchy. It works perfectly as the opening statement for the record. The band have said that Futurology is one of the most optimistic records they've ever released, and that really comes through in the lyrics written by Nicky. It's perfectly placed as the first track of the album and sets up the rest of the tracks nicely, and it does make a statement, especially coming from Rewind the Film, which was a record full of reflection and regret. Track 2, Walk Me to the Bridge. This was the first single released from this era, and what a banger it is. I remember hearing this on the radio when we were on holiday in Mallorca in 2014. My husband and I were so pumped up for the record and couldn't wait for it to be released. We were driving in the car on our way to dinner one night and one random radio station was playing it. We lost our minds. I remember driving past the sea with the sun going down and with this playing loud in the car. It was truly magical. There's been some speculation over the lyrics, and Nicky Wire has spoken whether the song was about former band member Richie Edwards or not. He has denied this, despite the song containing the "We smile at this ugly world, it never really suited you, and still blinded by your intellect" lines. The title alone is very telling, but Nicky, in fact, has said it's not about the Severn Bridge, but the Øresund Bridge that joins Sweden and Denmark. It's one of my favourite tracks by the Manics. The synths in the chorus really give it that anthemic lift. With James's passionate vocals, he just soars. And experiencing this live was just the icing on the cake. Their performance was accompanied by the music video directed by Kieran Evans on the backdrop screens, and it was so effective. The video was inspired by the film Run Lola Run, and it just adds to the drama and the power of the track. Track 3, Let's Go to War. So I just want to clear something up before I start to talk about this track in particular. While the title might sound provocative at first, the Manic Street Preachers have always used political and historical references in their songwriting. Here they're reflecting on protest movements and working class struggle rather than advocating conflict. So I just wanted to give the listeners some context here if you are not fully aware of the band's songwriting and this record. I ended up doing a bit of digging into the meaning of the song, and James confirmed that the track is a response to the band's own cynicism. Nicky mentioned that Let's Go to War is aligned with You Love Us and the Masses Against the Classes, and confirmed that a portion of the song is talking about working class anger, something that I already mentioned, and I completely get that. I also feel that they are tapping into that same energy that they had on their debut, Generation Terrorists. A bit of we don't give a fuck energy on a record that already sounds energized and full of life. James's vocals are really powerful, and with Kate LeBon on backing vocals, it just adds to how punchy and dynamic the track feels. It's a short track, but the Manics pack in so much detail. From Sean Moore's marching drums, it's made for the indie disco that James mentions in the previous track. And I've always thought that the guitar riff melody is very similar to Swan Lake, or is it something else? Ballet is not my forte. Track 4, The Next Jet to Leave Moscow. I love the instrumental and production that carries this track. It's got that Motoric style drum beat from Sean Moore, and it works so well here. This is what I was touching on earlier on in the episode, that no one else was experimenting like this back in 2014. There are a few exceptions, of course, but for an indie band and record, I really appreciate how they went for it for an entire project. Yes, this synth direction was slightly unexpected, especially coming from their previous record, Rewind the Film. And they did dabble in synths and electronica for Lifeblood, but because that album was so not very well received and didn't do very well commercially, no one would really predict that they would revisit the synth and electronica sound again and really turn it up a notch. Yes, Lifeblood is their synth record, but it is quite gentle in places where I feel that Futurology is slightly more aggressive. I think that you'd have to be a bit of a die-hard fan to fully understand the context of this track. It does make me laugh how self-aware they are, that they aren't afraid of documenting their faults and essentially taking the piss out of themselves. Firstly, the lyrics in the chorus make reference to a gig the band played in Russia. A request was for the band to remove the military badges from their jackets from their tour wardrobe, a request that the band fully complied with. Verse 2 includes my favourite lyric from the entire record. So, you played in Cuba. Did you like it, brother? I bet you felt proud, you silly little fucker. This, of course, is making reference to the 2001 gig the band played in Cuba in front of Fidel Castro. A move which didn't go down too well back home and in the press. It was historically notable because they were the first Western rock band to play there. It's one of their most autobiographical songs, and one that they execute perfectly. Track 5, Europa geht durch mich. Here we fucking go. This song is the prime example of a banger, and I will die on that hill. Featuring the vocals of German actress Nina Hoss. The English translation of the song title is Europe Goes Through Me, and this is absolutely relentless in every way. I would say that this track is the core of Futurology. There are fragments and little motifs of Nina's vocals throughout the record, little echoes here and there, and the energy really captures the Hansa Berlin legacy. I have already mentioned that one of the big inspirations for Futurology is the music of Simple Minds. Their 1980 record, Empires and Dance, in particular, struck a chord with James, and he has championed that record in so many interviews. It's one of my favourite Simple Minds records, a forgotten classic when the majority of people just know them as a big stadium rock act. Empires and Dance was so futuristic and ahead of its time, and shares the common theme with Futurology, all influenced by continental Europe, travel, music, arts, and culture. The first line of this track, Europe had a language problem, is a direct reference to the Simple Minds track, I Travel, which is track 1 on Empires and Dance. I remember seeing the Manics at the Leeds First Direct Arena when I first heard this track. As soon as James started singing, I turned to my husband and I shrieked, "It's fucking I Travel by Simple Minds!" My mind was blown and I've never been the same since. Two of my favourite bands that are the glue that ties this track and record together with some incredible production and that aggressive electronic sound that drives the song instantly reminds me of another Simple Minds song, 70 Cities as Love Brings the Fall, from their 1981 album Sons of Fascination. Listen to that track if you aren't aware and tell me that I am not crazy making this connection. What I love and fully appreciate is that the Manics took the inspiration from I Travel and 70 Cities from Simple Minds during their experimental era, but made Europa fully their own and put their own stamp all over it. When James duets with a female voice, it's absolute magic, and the chemistry with his powerful vocals with Nina's just clicks. It's one of my favourites from the record and one of my all-time favourite Manics tracks. Track 6, Divine Youth. The pace is slowed down just a touch for Divine Youth. Featuring vocals and harp by Georgia Ruth Williams, this works beautifully alongside James's vocals. Because it is slightly understated compared to some of the other tracks on the record, I think this one gets a little bit forgotten about. It's still a strong album track and one that really works. If you know the record, where this track sits in the running order is exactly why it works so well. The 80s synth stabs cut through the otherwise smooth production in George's soft vocals and harp, but I think that is intentional. Yes, it's quite restrained overall, but this is a track not to be overlooked in favour of the bangers. The softer edge I really appreciate, and like many tracks on this record, sound wonderful on vinyl and headphones. Track 7: Sex, Power, Love and Money. This track is just bonkers in the best way. It's slightly heavier with the instrumentation, a bit reminiscent of their past work, but with added synths. It's a lot more sparkly and brighter, especially following on from Divine Youth, which is more down tempo. We also get a Nicky Wyatt cameo vocal when he shouts with gusto the lines in the pre chorus. Talking of the pre chorus, the words shouted by Nicky are coupled with the title of the song. Such clever songwriting there. I love the first line in verse 2: upload your future and download your past. It's like a commentary of how social media was back in 2014. I think we all document a lot of ourselves and lives on social media, and it's having that balance. It's one of the most energetic tracks on the record and feels like the band leaning back into that glam punk attitude they've always had. Track 8: Dreaming a City, Huzovka. If you have not experienced driving to this instrumental at night, I urge you to play this loud and just take in the vibes, because this track absolutely fucking slaps. The instrumental arrangement and production are just so energetic and dynamic, and it really displays the Manics' talent as musicians. It just captures the whole essence of this record, experimental and futuristic, encapsulated by some fierce drumming by Sean Moore. Huzovka is the original name of the city Donetsk in Ukraine. The city was named after the Welsh businessman John Hughes, who built a steel plant and several coal mines. I didn't realise that John Hughes was born in Merthyr Tydfil, which isn't too far away from the Manics' hometown of Blackwood, until I was preparing for this episode. It's fascinating that the Manics have taken the foundation of this as the inspiration and added a European flavour into the overall artistic vision. You can picture driving on the Autobahn throughout this track, and keeping it strictly as an instrumental just elevates this even further. It is obvious that the band are also playing homage to Simple Minds and their instrumental from 1981, Theme for Great Cities. Even James's guitar riffs and textures are so similar to Charlie Burchill, and I actually forget sometimes that this instrumental is by the Manic Street Preachers. What is so refreshing is that the band are so inspired by Simple Minds and their creative output during the early 80s. James has talked about how much he loves Empires and Dance and Sons of Fascination during a time when Simple Minds were seemed a bit uncool. The press gave them such a hard time, calling them U2 copycats, which is just so untrue and so lazy. Their experimental era goes under the radar, and people forget how dark and unsettling those early Simple Minds records were. The next time you're planning for a walk or a drive, I urge you to listen to this track and then line up Theme for Great Cities by Simple Minds to follow after. You're welcome. Track 9: Black Square. So I talked earlier during Europa how that is essentially the core of Futurology. And here in Black Square, the intro starts off with Nina Hoss in spoken word of Europa's chorus, only this time in German. This track has got a underlying melancholy about it. It could be down to the vocal performance by James or the instrumental, but this has some lovely production and synth work. It might be one of the underrated tracks from the record, but it's cleverly placed in the track list. If it was placed next to Divine Youth, for example, it might not have the same impact. I love the line in verse 2, purged of all colour, the purest abstraction, which directly refers to the painting Black Square by Russian artist Kazimir Malevich. He was a pioneer in abstract art, which were composed of simple geometric shapes. The instrumental break in the song is completely different from the rest of the track's arrangement, and this could be a metaphor for the abstract art that this track is inspired by. Again, another example of how this record demonstrates the skill of the Manics as not only songwriters, but their musicianship and craft. You can tell that they poured their heart and soul into this project. Just listen to the attention to detail. The arrangements are so adventurous across this record. Track 10, Between the Clock and the Bed. Right, so I don't know what is going on over on AOTY, because when I was preparing for this episode, I was curious to find out the user score, and then I scanned at the overall rating for each song. This is currently rated 67, and I am fucking outraged. This track is absolutely beautiful. The title of the song is the name of the self-portrait by Edvard Munch, and the painting is a famous depiction of the artist as an unhappy and aged version of himself. I would say that the lyrical content of this track is more reflective and aligned of the Manic's previous record, Rewind the Film. It could have been written for those sessions, but I am so glad that they saved it for Futurology with a fuller production and synths. James shares the vocal duties with fellow Welshman Green Gartside, the frontman and lead vocalist of Scritti Politti. His sugary vocals alongside James's feel like a match made in heaven. If you are unfamiliar with Scritti Politti, I highly recommend the album Cupid and Psyche 85. It contains bangers such as Absolute and Would Be's and some impressive production for an 80s pop record. I read that Gartside was the Manic's first choice for the feature, and honestly for me, this track is one of the album's highlights. Track 11, Misguided Missile. The melancholy continues with Misguided Missile, and that intro with those synths, that build with the drums coming in is just so satisfying. And then James comes in with verse 1. I am a self-obsessed fool, self-centered and bruised. I am a misguided missile, consumed with denial. Wow. I think there's a little bit of Rewind the Film bleeding into this track a little bit. And one thing I noticed listening back in preparation for this episode is how melancholic the second half of this record actually is. There is a lot of guilt, regret, and darkness creeping in. But when it sounds this good, again, the production is so impressive here. James has always sounded wonderful. His vocals on the entire record are beautiful, and how he manages to inject so much passion and feeling into the lyrics is so impressive. Track 12, The View from Stow Hill. The penultimate track, which is quite haunting and features an understated vocal performance from James. He uses the melancholy of the instrumental to full effect with his voice and the lyrics, which I interpret as the Manics returning home from a grueling tour and having that sadness and slight resentment being back home. I think a lot of people can relate, especially if you have moved away from home and then back to the place you grew up in, the place that used to feel like home, and to find out that it's completely changed and somehow doesn't feel like home anymore. There is some personal introspection here, which I assume has bled through from the Rewind the Film sessions. And a bit of a controversial take, but I think they should have ended the record with this track. It most definitely works as an album closer, and I feel like the next track is quite jarring following on from this. Track 13, Mayakovsky. Now, I will be honest, back in 2014, I did not have time for this instrumental closer at all. I was a bit pissed off with the Manics for choosing to end the record this way, and I just didn't get it. I have warmed up to it fully now, but I still think this would have worked better as a hidden track or B-side. The instrumental references Vladimir Mayakovsky, a Russian futurist poet. This does tie nicely with the album's narrative and European cultural themes and references. The drumming is great, obviously, and it has hints of prog running through it, which also sound great. But we know that the Manics don't follow the rules and do things their way, and I actually respect them for that. This track is a curveball, but in the context of the record and their experimental vision, it also makes sense to end the record in this chaotic fashion. It's a bit quirky, it's a bit daft, but you can't help but smile when you finally reach the end of this wonderful record. And nobody can shout Mayakovsky in the way that Nicky Wire can. When Futurology was released, it was met with widespread critical acclaim. Critics praised how adventurous and confident the record sounded, especially following the much more stripped back and reflective tone of Rewind the Film. A lot of reviews highlighted the band's willingness to dive headfirst into European influences, from motoric rhythms to Cold War aesthetics, and the electronic textures that run throughout the album. It felt like the Manics were opening the doors to a much bigger sonic world, embracing art, history, and travel in a way that gave the record a really distinctive identity. What makes Futurology even more fascinating looking back is that the band haven't really returned to this particular sound since. While later records have experimented in different ways, nothing has quite revisited the synth driven European atmosphere that defines this album. For me, Futurology sits perfectly alongside Lifeblood as part of the band's electronic and synth leaning side. Two records that show how far the Manics are willing to push themselves outside the traditional guitar indie band template. And honestly, I still hold out hope that one day they might complete what I like to think of as the synth trilogy. Imagine a future record that sits alongside Lifeblood and Futurology, expanding on that lush electronic sound and all those European influences once again. Whether that ever happens or not, Futurology remains a brilliant reminder of just how fearless the Manic Street Preachers can be when they fully embrace experimentation. And while I'm making wishes, I'd also love to see this album get the vinyl treatment it really deserves. A proper gatefold sleeve, some thoughtful artwork and photography inside, and maybe even a coloured pressing would be incredible. It's a record that feels so visually and sonically rich that it deserves a presentation to match. So, if anyone at Sony happens to be listening, please give Futurology the deluxe reissue it deserves. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. If you've enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate it if you could follow, like or share, as it helps other music lovers discover my podcast. If you're listening on YouTube, don't forget to like this episode and subscribe to the Indie Pop Girl podcast. It really helps the algorithm push the video out to more people, and as a small independent podcast that's still growing, every like and subscription genuinely makes a huge difference. I'm posting full episodes, shorts and little teasers over there, so there's always something new to watch. Let me know in the comments if you love the Manics, and if Futurology is your favourite album from them. I always read and respond to comments, and I love hearing what you all think. You can also find me on Instagram and Threads at The Indie Pop Girl, and on TikTok at The Indie Pop Girl Podcast. And if you want to dive even deeper, there's a public Spotify playlist called Favourite Tracks from Podcast Episodes, where I add some of my top picks from each record I cover. It's updated as new episodes drop, so you might just find your next obsession. I'll be back very soon, and I'll be continuing with the Indie Classic series. I'll be discussing a record from 2017 from one of my all-time favourite bands. I've covered them already on the podcast, and a little clue, the record I'll be talking about won the Mercury Prize, and I can't wait to talk about it. Until then, I'm Rachel, the Indie Pop Girl. Thanks for listening, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.